What if awakening wasn't about escaping darkness, but diving straight into it? We've been sold a lie that enlightenment is all bliss, clarity, and eternal peace. But the truth, real transformation begins when the light burns so bright it exposes every shadow you've ever run from. This isn't just about raising your vibration. It's about facing the parts of yourself you've locked away, the pain you've numbed, and the ego that's been silently sabotaging you all along. If you're ready to see the unspoken side of spiritual awakening, the breakdowns before the breakthroughs, the chaos before the calm, then keep watching, because the real journey doesn't start until you're brave enough to walk through the fire. Here is your text with proper punctuation, paragraph breaks, and formatting, while keeping the original content unchanged. We've all heard about the awakening of consciousness, and perhaps some are in that place right now. This state where we gain a new understanding of life, when the veil of illusions begins to fall, and the truth about how reality works becomes increasingly evident. But few speak of the dark side of this process. Embarking on the journey of self-knowledge is not a simple walk toward the light. It is, many times, a journey through the shadows. When we decide to awaken, we are not just ascending to a life of bliss. Awakening means opening doors to parts of ourselves that we have hidden or ignored. Opening ourselves to full consciousness is like opening a portal where not only light, but also shadow awaits us. Behind every insight, there is a hidden layer of ourselves. Behind every revelation, a side we avoid looking at. In this video, we will explore this forgotten and uncomfortable side of awakening and why it is essential to embrace it. Understanding the dark side of the journey is not about fleeing from the truth, but embracing the human experience in its entirety. There is an idea, almost a myth, that the awakening of consciousness is like a magic spell that solves all of our problems. It is the promise of a full life, free from suffering, a state of uninterrupted peace where we finally find ourselves. For many, awakening seems like a place of rest, of relief, where the pains of the world no longer reach us. But this is the first trap of awakening, and it is as subtle as it is powerful. This kind of thinking leads us to believe that we just need to reach a certain frequency or state of enlightenment for everything to dissolve. It is an enticing view, one that promises relief and turns awakening into a product to be consumed in the pursuit of instant peace. The truth, however, is that awakening is less about escaping pain and more about seeing pain with new eyes. It is less about eliminating problems and more about learning to coexist with them in their essence, without fleeing or ignoring. This is the first point of disillusionment for many, realizing that awakening does not remove the human condition, does not eliminate imperfections, doubts, or anxieties. On the contrary, it amplifies the perception of them. True spirituality has no shortcuts. It requires confronting, not avoiding. And confronting oneself is painful because it forces us to face what we have ignored, hidden, or repressed over the years. Upon embarking on the journey of awakening, one of the first things we face is the ego, the structure of identity we have built throughout our lives. The ego is a complex and sophisticated construction that does not like to be challenged, much less deconstructed. And when someone begins awakening expecting it to exalt or elevate their own importance, they encounter an abyss of frustration. For awakening does not nourish the ego, it reveals it in all its fragility. The ego clings to ideas such as, I am special, I am evolving, I am above the illusions, and the spiritual journey becomes just another form of personal glorification. But true awakening does not grant a status of superiority. It demands a deep surrender. It reveals that we are not special beings separate from the whole, but only a small wave in the vast ocean of existence. The illusion of awakening as a title that elevates us above others dissolves, and the individual finds themselves in a position of humility before the vastness of the universe. There is an inevitable disillusionment that accompanies true awakening, and this disillusionment is painful. It is as if the mind, which has long clung to beliefs, absolute truths, and external solutions, begins to undo these foundations. Disillusionment is a process of cleansing, a shedding of all the beliefs we've created about life and about ourselves. And this cleansing is, for the most part, uncomfortable because it takes away our ground. When consciousness expands, it illuminates the internal shadows, the collection of everything we have repressed, hidden, or denied about ourselves. Most of us prefer to ignore this part, maintaining an idealized image of the spiritual self. But inevitably, sooner or later, the shadow manifests, and there is no way to proceed without facing it. The shadow is formed by everything we avoid seeing in ourselves, character traits we deem unacceptable, emotions we consider shameful, painful memories we bury. It is what we repress because it doesn't fit the image we have created for ourselves. What many forget is that by trying to ignore these parts, they don't disappear. On the contrary, they remain latent, acting in our unconscious and influencing our choices, our relationships, our view of the world. Facing the shadow means coming into contact with aspects that may be disturbing, but that are also powerful. And more importantly, the shadow holds valuable parts of our vital energy. Unconsciously, you spend part of your vital energy or chi keeping your skeletons in the closet. And this, in the long run, can have terrible consequences. Many believe that shadow work is just a compliment on the spiritual journey. However, facing the dark side is the very path. When we dive into the shadow, we find traits that often contradict our self-image: envy, jealousy, resentment, arrogance, insecurity. It is painful to realize that no matter how much we have sought to be good or spiritual, we still carry these emotions and impulses. This is the moment when we confront the self we thought we had overcome. That side we didn't want to acknowledge still exists within us. The shadow often manifests most clearly in our relationships. Each person we encounter, especially those who trigger strong emotional reactions in us, whether anger, fear, or even disproportionate attraction, is in some way a mirror of our own shadow. What bothers or fascinates us in others is often aspects of our own personality that we have ignored or rejected. This phenomenon is what Jung called projection, where repressed traits and feelings are projected onto others. By realizing that what bothers us in others actually belongs to us, we can use our relationships as a path to self-knowledge, reducing the tendency to blame others for what in reality resides in us. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean indiscriminately embracing harmful behaviors, but rather accepting that these traits and emotions are part of our wholeness. When we resist the shadow, it strengthens, maintaining subtle control over us. But by recognizing and accepting it, it loses its power over our psyche. Jung said that the process of individuation, the search for self-knowledge and integration of the personality, is the path to wholeness and true transformation. Facing the shadow sets us free because what we recognize loses its ability to dominate us. Aspects like anger or fear, when understood, become tools for self-knowledge. Anger, for example, can teach us about our boundaries, fear about the value of courage. This process makes us more compassionate with others as we begin to see their shadows without judgment, knowing that everyone has unspoken parts. On the journey of awakening, the ego reveals itself as a frequent obstacle. It is, in a sense, a mask created to protect our identity and reinforce our importance. At the same time, the ego is the source of deep internal conflicts. Our mind, accustomed to constructing a solid and stable image of who we are, tends to resist the transformations that awakening brings. This resistance is natural, but to move beyond it, we need to understand how the ego functions and why it reacts with so much fear and control to the idea of dissolution. The ego is the center of our identity, a structure that maintains our beliefs, desires, and the image we've built over time. It is responsible for making us feel distinct, separate from the rest of the world, and it is precisely this separation that becomes an obstacle on the spiritual path. The ego creates an illusory sense of permanence, trying to convince us that we are defined by our thoughts and personal stories. Throughout life, the ego strengthens through experiences and the need for protection. It clings to labels, successes, and even failures, constantly seeking affirmation of its worth, and thus, any attempt at transcendence, any sign that our identity is not as solid as it seems, generates internal resistance. The ego fears dissolution because it views awakening as a threat of symbolic death. For the ego, losing its certainties and definitions is akin to losing its very existence. This fear generates enormous internal resistance. When faced with the invitation to expand consciousness, the ego responds with defensive thoughts and emotions: fear, doubt, anger. It's as if it fights to maintain control, to avoid being absorbed by something greater. This internal struggle is described in various spiritual traditions. Jesus, when saying that we must lose our life to gain it, refers to the need to abandon the illusions of the ego to find true life. Losing the self does not mean annihilation, but an opening to a new way of living. Some people believe that merging with God or the light means losing individuality, but it is the opposite. It means expanding this consciousness to the entire universe. Speaking in terms of vibration and energy, when two waves are aligned in frequency and phase, they create constructive interference. The energy of both waves combines, resulting in a wave of greater amplitude. The ego, in its relentless quest for control, even attempts to appropriate the spiritual journey. It wears the mask of enlightenment, creating the illusion that it has already reached a higher state. In his book, The Mask of Enlightenment, Chogyam Trungpa explains that this false spirituality is an attempt by the ego to protect itself, transforming spirituality into a title, an achievement, rather than a journey of detachment. This phenomenon is seen when the ego creates a holy image, becoming attached to ideas of superiority, believing itself to be more evolved than others. By doing so, it avoids the real inner work and substitutes true awakening with a role, a performance. This trap of enlightenment is a subtle yet powerful diversion that can paralyze spiritual growth and keep the individual trapped in a cycle of illusion. The only way to transcend the ego is through constant vigilance and humility. We must observe our own thoughts and attitudes closely, questioning the motivations behind our actions. This exercise in self-awareness prevents the ego from taking control of our journey. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, says that self-knowledge leads to humility. For the more we know our own weaknesses, the less we feel the need to exalt ourselves. This practice, recommended in various traditions, consists of observing our thoughts and emotions without becoming involved with them. By doing this, we begin to realize that the ego is not our true essence. This disidentification is a crucial step, for it weakens the ego's hold and brings us closer to a purer and more genuine experience of reality. Silent, alert presence allows us to experience life in its fullness, free from the limitations imposed by the ego. The spiritual journey is not a linear path full of light and serenity. More often, it reveals itself as a crossing through a deep and shadowy abyss, a process known as the dark night of the soul. This concept, originating from Sape, John of the Cross, describes a state of profound spiritual and emotional crisis where everything seems lost and the meaning of life is obscured. This chapter invites us to explore this painful yet transformative experience. The dark night of the soul is not merely a negative experience. It is a necessary phase for spiritual growth. During this stage, the person may feel existential helplessness, the loss of purpose, and the absence of connection with the sacred. What once seemed a well-lit path now appears to fade, leading to deep introspection and questioning of one's life and beliefs. Thomas More, in his book Care of the Soul, explains that this phase is an invitation to strip away the illusions we have built about ourselves and life, preparing us for a new understanding of the sacred. The crisis that characterizes the dark night of the soul is often accompanied by a sense of loneliness and disconnection. As Paulo Coelho points out in The Alchemist, this darkness is often a necessary passage for us to discover our inner light. The pain and confusion are catalysts that force us to confront unrecognized truths and abandon the limiting beliefs that keep us imprisoned. This process can be compared to a metamorphosis. Just as the caterpillar transforms into a butterfly after a period of darkness and solitude in the cocoon, we too can undergo a profound inner transformation by accepting and traversing this abyss. The pain of the dark night of the soul can lead us to a spiritual rebirth, where a new vision of ourselves and the world emerges. One key to crossing the dark night of the soul is acceptance. Carl Jung asserts that what we resist persists, while what we accept can transform. During this period of pain and confusion, resistance only prolongs suffering. When we accept the situation we find ourselves in, allowing ourselves to feel all the emotions that arise, we begin to create space for transformation. Accepting the dark night as part of our spiritual journey allows us to release control and, in doing so, find a lighter path through the darkness. This process can lead to clarity that once seemed unattainable. The lessons learned during the darkness prepare us for a more authentic life, one more aligned with who we truly are. Emerging from the dark night does not mean that the pain has disappeared, but rather that we have learned to carry our experiences more lightly, finding a new purpose and meaning in the quest for a higher state of consciousness and clarity. It is easy to fall into the trap of spiritual superiority. As we deepen our practices and knowledge, the ego can transform these experiences into a false sense of grandeur. Hidden pride can silently infiltrate, leading us to believe that we are above others. Enlightenment is often idealized as the pinnacle of spirituality, but this pursuit can quickly turn into a competition. Osho, in The Revolution of Consciousness, emphasizes that when enlightenment becomes a matter of status, we move away from its true purpose. The ego begins to seek validation through spiritual achievements, leading to the belief that we are on a higher level of development compared to others. Brené Brown, in The Gifts of Imperfection, describes pride as an attempt to protect our vulnerabilities. When we feel insecure about our worth, we may cling to a false sense of superiority to compensate for these uncertainties. This defense can manifest in various ways, such as belittling others or developing a critical attitude toward those who do not follow the same spiritual path. This behavior not only pushes others away, but also prevents us from seeing the richness of human experiences. By placing a barrier between ourselves and others, we lose the opportunity to learn from the diversity of paths and perspectives. Spirituality should be an invitation to inclusion, where the experiences of all are valued, not a competition to see who has more knowledge or understanding. As we deepen in spirituality, we risk isolating ourselves in a spiritual bubble. Jack Kornfield, in The Path of Love, observes that excessive introspection can distance us from the world and authentic human interactions. We become so focused on our own growth that we lose empathy and connection with others. This disconnection can create a sense of superiority, where we begin to view the world as those who have not awakened and those who are on the right path. This duality is harmful and counterproductive, as it perpetuates the idea of separation and feeds hidden pride. True spirituality requires humility, and humility is not about devaluing oneself, but about redirecting our focus outward. Rather than solely concentrating on our own experiences, humility helps us recognize that the spiritual journey is a shared experience, where we are all learning and growing together, and each of us has our own struggles and challenges. True spirituality is revealed in the practice of service and compassion. The ego can easily distort the spiritual pursuit, leading us to believe that our knowledge or practice places us on a pedestal. However, true enlightenment is not about being seen as superior, but about the willingness to serve others. When we begin to see spirituality as a means of helping and supporting others, we move away from the superiority mindset. Serving others becomes a reflection of our own awakening, an opportunity to connect with humanity and create a network of compassion. Awakening to consciousness is not about reaching a definitive light, but about opening up to see all the nuances of the human experience. Those who embark on this journey must be prepared to face their shadows, their pain, and the illusions they have created about themselves. The truth is that awakening is an endless journey, where with each step, we encounter new layers to be unveiled and integrated. The dark side of awakening is, in fact, an essential part of the process. It is in this darkness that we discover our true strength and our capacity to love. Not only the light, but also the shadow. I truly hope this video has helped you in some way on your journey of expanding consciousness. Thank you for watching.